Judgment is guided by rewards and punishment. So a lot of times these kiddos may end up getting grounded from their favorite activities because of some sort of a behavioral issue. So it's very important to be educating parents that they're still learning, especially the early school age child. They're still learning about the rules and about consequences. They haven't quite developed that sense of reasoning yet. Cognitively, they're still pretty immature. So this is something that we definitely want to be educating our parents about. For Erickson, remember I told you Erickson is the theorist that I want you guys to be focusing on. So for this age group, it's industry versus inferiority. So the school age child develops certain skills and knowledge and a sense of accomplishment because now they're in school, right? So they're having homework done, they're learning how to read, they might get involved in some kind of a science project. You know, I think I had one when I was in eighth grade that I did. I built this dinosaur thing with a working volcano, and it was really exciting, and I actually felt a real sense of accomplishment when the volcano actually erupted. So it's very common in this age group that these are the types of activities that they're going to be involved in. They should be taught about cooperation with peers, that not everybody wins, but we want to be a really good competitor, right? We want to have a sense of support for all of us, like working as a team, right? So team building is very important with this age group so that they learn how to cooperate with each other. Okay. As far as their social development, peers become more integral to their sense of self. Clubs and best friends become more common. Bullying is definitely a drawback. It can begin during this time of skill development and social growth. So that's definitely something to educate parents about because this can be very devastating to their self-esteem. It can also be devastating to their emotional growth when they're bullied. And with this age of technology, cyberbullying really has taken over face-to-face bullying because kids are online all the time, right? So they have smartphones when they're getting into middle school, sometimes even younger, depending on the parents. So, you know, bullying definitely takes place. It doesn't have to be done face to face. They prefer the company of same gender peers during the school age, they tend to. Later school age, they start to develop that interest in the opposite sex. They start to think about that in terms of, you know, the opposite sex. So that is definitely something to talk to the parents about. We definitely want to make sure that we're doing the sex education during this time where there's lots of growth, there's lots of interaction with those of the opposite sex. So we definitely want to be uh, encouraging our parents to do that, the sex education with their children during this age. Most relationships that these kids have emerge from school interactions, so it happens in school. So that's another thing to keep in mind and to educate parents about. The majority of their social connections are going to emerge from school. Any questions so far on anything I've covered so far with the school age? Hopefully this is making sense. All of this information is coming from your ATI book and from my own personal practice. So it's a combination of the two. Okay. So some age appropriate activities for our school age kids, simple board games, especially for your younger school age, games like Chutes and Ladders. Then as they're getting a little older, games like Sorry are very good for this age group. They like to start collecting things. I know when I was this age, I collected teddy bears. I had teddy bear, my room was just loaded with them. I mean, my dad had to put shelves up along my walls because I had so many teddy bears. Stamps, rocks, shells. Now with rocks, they like to have the real glittery crystal type rocks. Those are very cool. So those are the type of rocks that if they do collect rocks, that's probably what they're going to collect. Some kids, you know, when they go on vacation with their family for that wonderful summer vacation that they get to go on with the family, they may collect something from wherever they go and bring it back. ride bicycles. Now, this is two-wheelers, not tricycles. And normally by this age, they're starting to get rid of the training wheels. So they may start out with training wheels, but eventually they're going to get to the point where they're not going to have training wheels anymore. So bicycle safety is going to be very important to be educating parents about wearing helmets, elbow pads, knee pads, that kind of thing for their kids. And then organized sports, usually in the later school age, they start to get involved in organized sports. I know for my kids, by the time they were in middle school, they were involved in things like track, basketball, football, soccer, things like that. So definitely by the time they're in middle school, they're getting involved in all these kinds of things. And organized sports actually helps for them to learn how to collaborate and to cooperate with other kids their age. So that's actually not a bad thing. But sometimes I think parents get a little bit overwrought with the organized sports and they put a lot of pressure on their kids to perform, and that is not good. We definitely want to make sure that we're educating parents that this is a very pivotal time in the kid's life as far as developing their sense of self, especially as they get to that tweeny age where they're not quite adolescents, but they're older than the early school age, sometimes between 10 and 12 can be a very delicate age. And so we want to make sure that parents understand that they shouldn't be putting too much pressure on their kids to perform, that just being involved and doing their best and learning how to collaborate and cooperate with their peers is what should be most important. Any questions on the age appropriate activities? Okay, thanks. I like to know I'm not by myself. Thanks so much, guys. I appreciate it. Okay, so now let's move on to those adolescents, shall we? Actually, if I'm honest, these were probably one of my very favorite age groups to work with, but they were actually obviously the most challenging, but they really were my favorite. I did enjoy working with this group. So they like to test boundaries, right? This age group loves to test boundaries. They like to see what they can get away with because they're trying to figure out who they are. They're trying to figure out their self identity, right? They do tend to make plans for their future career during later adolescence. So that's not unusual. Peer group greatly influences their behavior during the adolescence. And those of you that have adolescents, you know exactly what I'm talking about. Their peer group is everything. It's one of those things where I know my mom used to tell my siblings, if your friends were to jump off a building, would you jump off a building? Because my older siblings were very influenced by their peer groups. So I used to hear my mom say that quite a bit as I was growing up. For Erickson, identity versus role confusion. So, who am I and where do I fit? So, they're really developing their sense of self and who they are. And they might go through some role confusion, especially if you have very strong-willed parents that are trying to influence their future careers, trying to, really, I hate to use the word pressure, but there are parents out there, especially those that have professions like doctors, like lawyers, maybe even nurses, I don't know, that may try to influence their kids to go into the same profession that they themselves are in because they're very proud of what they've accomplished, and they want their kids to feel that same sense of accomplishment. And makes them feel a sense of accomplishment as parents that they were able to raise someone who was able to do something so positive. So, risk-taking behaviors become very common with this age group. So, the one thing you have to remember about your adolescent is that they are not rational. They don't rationally think through situations. They emotionally think through situations. So they are definitely guided by their emotions. So sometimes they do things that ordinarily you would hope that maybe they wouldn't do. But if their friends are doing it, they're more likely to take that risk as well because they feel invulnerable. They're invincible. Nothing's going to happen to them. Things happen to someone else. It doesn't happen to them. There's no way that it's going to happen to them. So that tends to make them a little more willing to take risks. And they're also developing more independence. They're away from home more. They don't have that parental guidance like they had when they were school age. They're doing things on their own. So they are having more of a sense of independence. They may have a job, a part-time job that they go to after school or maybe on the weekends, depending. I had a part-time job when I was this age. So, I used to work a couple of nights a week just for a few hours, and then I would work every Saturday pretty much all day long. So, you know, you do develop that sense of independence at this age. So it's more likely that because they don't have that parental observation all the time, that they are going to be more willing to step out the box and maybe do something that their friends have convinced them to do. Body image, crucial to this age group. It's all about the body image and comparing themselves to their peers. That is another big part of this age group. And when they develop that body image, this can be retained throughout their life. So if they have issues, if they are getting bullied at this age because maybe they're overweight or maybe they're really short, maybe they have a lot of acne. Maybe, I don't know, maybe they're more shy. They're not as outgoing as some of the quote unquote in crowd, and they face a little bit more bullying because of it. This could definitely affect them even into adulthood. And their self-esteem is very fragile at this age. And a lot of it is related to their sense of self. And if they're going through these trials with their peers, it can definitely affect their sense of self. It definitely can. And that can later affect them into adulthood. Any questions on this part from anybody? Is that making sense for everybody? Those of you that have adolescents, I think you know exactly what I'm talking about. Good. Thanks, Kay. Okay, so social development. It is, you are absolutely right, Jen. It is a very hard time. It is very challenging. It's challenging for the parents, but we have to remember it's also challenging for the kids. They're really trying to be more independent. They don't want to be treated like kids anymore. They want someone to actually listen to them. And I think if we can educate, oh no, Renee has two. Oh, you're going to do fine. You are going to do great. um, if we can just educate parents that we're involved with, that, you know, let them be a little bit more independent. Your helicopter parents, those that circle and circle and circle and circle and circle, they suffocate kids at this age, and these kids, they have issues, and that's a lot of times why they rebel and why they may do something that is completely out of character for them, because they feel that they're constantly being pressured to be a certain way or behave a certain way. They have no sense of self. It's when you have those dictatorial type of parents that do as I say and not as I do, and you absolutely have to follow these rules. That becomes a challenge for these kids. It really does. So for their social development, as I said a little bit ago, the peers are very central to them. And the peers actually provide a support system for them. So when you are interviewing an adolescent, say you're working in the emergency room or you work in a family clinic, and you're interviewing an adolescent, it's important to ask them about their support system. It's important to ask them about their peers. Okay, that would be very important because their social development is so integral to who they are. So it's very important that we're asking them those types of questions. Their best friend relationships are more stable during the adolescent stage and longer lasting. Okay, they can be friends for the rest of their lives sometimes, depending whether or not they stay in the same neighborhood or if they end up moving away. But with the internet, we can stay connected with things like Facebook. They can stay connected. So you'd be amazed how long these relationships can last. And it's so important to them these friend relationships and these peer relationships. The parent-child relationship will go through a change, obviously, because those kids are trying to develop a greater sense of independence. So again, providing that anticipatory guidance to the parents as these kids are nearing their latter adolescent stage, that they are going to want to be more independent, and that's okay. Let's let them. Let's encourage that. Let's have that little bit of independence, because that's only going to serve them when they get into adulthood. If we stint this development during adolescence, that only is going to cause problems for them as adults. And they're going to have a lot more difficulty figuring out situations and problem solving if we don't allow them a little bit of latitude to solve problems. Okay? They're not kids necessarily, but they're not adults. They're not full grown. Their brains are definitely not full grown. Remember, they're reactionary, they're emotional, they're not rational. So, that definitely plays in, but we still should allow them some decisional making capabilities. We definitely should. And the parents should as well. Okay, any questions on their social development for the adolescent? Okay, I'm moving on. All right, so some age appropriate activities for our adolescent group: nonviolent video games. That's really up to the parents, the nonviolent part. Video games for sure. But the nonviolent part is really up to the parent if they feel it's okay to let their kiddos play the more, the more violent video games where there's a lot of gunfight and there's a lot of physical fighting. Um, it really depends on the kids' maturity, their cognitive level, and how mature they are. A more mature child, definitely at this age, would probably be able to handle playing a more physically violent game. But again, that's really going to be up to the parents. We, as their care providers, just need to provide them that anticipatory guidance that this could tend to make them a little more aggressive, especially if they're allowing them to play these games in the early adolescent stage. Maybe not so much in the latter adolescent stage, but in the early adolescent stage, we do want to try to steer them clear of the more violent video games if we can. They spend a lot of their time on the computer, as much time as they possibly can. So that's definitely something to educate parents about. Music becomes very important to this age group. They start to develop their own sense of what they really like to listen to. And they've grown up listening to what their parents listen to. And some may continue to listen to what their parents listen to, and others may venture forth. And, I know for my kids, heavy metal, grunge, came around when my kids were adolescents, and I mean, not my favorite at all, but the kids liked it, so but that's okay. you know I listen to what they listen to because I want to know what they're listening to, and I can't say that it was my favorite, but I can't say that some of it probably is not ideal, I have to say. So definitely telling parents that you need to have those conversations with them, because they're going to be exposed to these things if their peer group is involved in these things, if their peer group is being raised by parents that are very permissive and let them pretty much do whatever they want because they're their friends and not really their parent. That is something definitely to be aware of. Again, with the organized sports, only now it's even more of an important part of their development, because they're getting into organized sports through school. So things like football, basketball, track, cross country, wrestling, swimming for some schools. Very, very important. I know when I was in high school, I was a bowler. So that was my sport. Caring for a pet. A lot of times we want to maybe give them the responsibility of a pet. And that's another family member. So you need to be educating the parents about, they need to be emphasizing that you are responsible for this pet. If you want this dog or this cat or this rabbit or guinea pig or whatever the case may be, you are responsible for that. So I'm an animal lover. So any pets that were in my household for my family, I usually took the responsibility for because I was the animal lover, that I wanted to make sure that the pets were taken care of. So social events, things like going to the movies. Now, this is something that these kiddos have not been able to partake in since we've been under the COVID restrictions. There's been no movies, they don't get to go to dances. A lot of kids that graduated last year, not only did they not, or this year, I should say, not only did they not get to go to their proms, but they didn't get to go to their graduation ceremonies either. So that really is going to impact the current adolescent groups that you may come in contact with in your eventual practice, depending on where you work. So that's definitely something to be aware of. But being able to interact with their peers is very important, and we don't want to discourage that. There's lots of virtual platforms that they can utilize to meet up with their friends and to talk with their friends. So we definitely want to be encouraging that. Okay, any questions on age-appropriate activities for the adolescent? Otherwise, I'm going to move into the alterations in health that I wanted to cover today. Okay, thanks, Kay. I appreciate it. Okay, so I picked out some very specific problems that either the school age or even adolescents could be faced with. So fractures, obviously. When you have a fracture, that's more force being applied to the bone than it can withstand. So this can happen either from falls, like from their bike, or rough play, and contact sports when they're involved in those contact sports, especially things like basketball, soccer, football, wrestling, they can end up with fractures. So definitely something to provide anticipatory guidance to the parents about with this age group. Plus, remember, for your adolescents, they have that risk-taking behavior. So, they may decide to do some really crazy things. They learn to drive at this age. So we definitely want to be aware of motor vehicle accidents and making sure that they're being safe. Making sure that they're not texting while they're driving or being distracted by the music or being distracted by the people that are in the car with them. So fractures can definitely result from a car accident, right? So definitely want to provide that guidance to the parents. There's lots of pain with fractures. They may require casting depending on the type of fracture. They may even require surgery depending. So that's definitely something to be aware of. Asthma. This is the most common reason why a pediatric person comes to the emergency room is asthma. It can either be exercise induced or it can be allergic. So if these kiddos, parents decide, okay, we're going to let them have a pet, but they're allergic to the pet dander, this is a lot of time when that comes out, right? That can produce an allergic type of asthma. So if they do have asthma, maintenance is key to asthma. This is a chronic lung condition. Sometimes they may, as they grow, and they are maintaining their asthma, they may be able to get to the point where they don't have as many problems with it as what they once did. But it is a chronic condition, so it definitely requires a lot of anticipatory guidance and education about the maintenance medications, inhalers, peak flows, all of those types of things. And those of you that may have kids that are asthmatic, you know exactly what I'm talking about. Maintenance is key with asthma. Maintenance, definitely maintenance. Sickle cell anemia, this is an inherited disorder. You have to have both parents as carriers in order for the child to end up with sickle cell anemia. So stress a lot of times can induce a crisis. And most commonly during the school age is where this happens because they're in school, right? So they get a lot of stress when they're in school. They get stressed maybe to perform, to get good grades, whatever the case may be. So this can definitely trigger a crisis. So the red blood cells are sickle shaped, so they're malformed, and it causes clumping. And most commonly during a crisis, they're going to have pain in their joints, elbow joint, knee joint. They may end up with chest pain because those cells may clump along the thoracic area, so they end up with chest pain. These kiddos can become hypoxic during a crisis because the oxygen carrying capacity of those red blood cells can be affected. So they may require oxygen. They may require, I mean, they are going to require fluids because we want to hydrate them because they can get very easily dehydrated during a crisis. So pain management, fluid replacement, wanting to make sure that they are resting as much as possible during that crisis, conserving their energy because they're definitely going to have some activity intolerance related to this problem. Okay, so infections can be another trigger as well. And during this time when they're around other kids, they can tend to get infections a little more easily. Appendicitis is another very common problem that mostly affects our school age population, most commonly by the age of 10. Usually in the fall. That's what I remember from my practice working with the pediatric population. It would happen a lot in the fall. It's an inflammatory process that involves the vermiform appendix. So they usually get very intense right-sided lower quadrant pain, vomiting, they may have a fever. Now, sometimes when they get this abdominal pain, the parents may mistake it for constipation because at this age, kids don't take the time to go to the bathroom when they need to go to the bathroom, especially when they're in school. They will delay it and prolong it as long as they can because having a bowel movement when you're an adolescent or school age and you're in school with your peers, not good. So they won't go while they're in school. So sometimes the parents may mistake it for constipation, and you can buy, enemas, Fleet's enemas over the counter. You can get all kinds of things for constipation over the counter, and the parents may mistakenly give that. And if they do, that can trigger a rupture. So that would be something maybe just to educate that if they're complaining of a lot of pain in the abdomen especially, or maybe they're having vomiting or they're having vomiting with a fever and complaining of that right lower quadrant pain, they really should seek their care provider. They really should be in contact with them, maybe bring them in to be evaluated. If it's really severe, if the temperature is really high, then they need to go to the emergency room because if they give them an enema thinking that it's constipation, that could cause a rupture. If the appendix ruptures, that can cause peritonitis and the kiddos can get really septic really fast. Okay. Appendicitis used to be a guaranteed surgery, but it's not so much anymore. There's a lot of your surgeons out there who will first try antibiotics for a certain period of time to see if it fixes the problem rather than performing surgery. When I first heard that, I was floored by it. This is a couple years ago that I heard that. I don't know how common that process is. I don't remember seeing that in any of the literature that I looked at. But I know that there's a lot of surgeons out there who don't just jump to surgery, that will actually do antibiotics to try to resolve an appendicitis rather than doing surgery. Surgery is a very invasive thing, and they can have complications from having surgery, obviously. So I understand the theory behind it. It just floored me because I know how easy it is for these things to rupture. So it was kind of, I was taken by surprise, but I do understand it. So just so that if you're working with this population, with the pediatric population, just if you're presented with this problem, just providing that anticipatory guidance that it's really up to the provider what the plan of care as far as how they're going to manage the appendicitis as far as medical management is really going to be up to the provider. And then lastly, burns. Now, we talked a little bit about burns with our toddler preschooler population, if they grab a hold of the pans of hot water, keep them out of the kitchen. But with the school age and the adolescents, we have to be worried about them playing with fire. They get a little bit of pyromania during the school age where they're just fascinated by fire. Well, fire leads to burns. They might play with matches, lighten stuff on fire, stick it in the garbage can, or whatever the case may be. Cooking is another thing that they start to do especially if they have parents who work and the kids are by themselves when they get home from school. Well, they want to be able to have a snack, so they learn how to use the microwave. But we need to be educating the parents on how to use the microwave safely, because when they take the lid off of whatever they cooked, that rush of steam that comes up can cause a scalding burn. Scalding burns are the most common types of burns that they may encounter, but remember, they like to play with fire, so they could also get thermal burns from the fire. Firecrackers. In your adolescent age group, they like to play with firecrackers, and maybe they'll decide they're going to hold one in their hand. Well, that's going to cause a problem, isn't it? They may lose their hand from that. Or they may accidentally set something on fire with their firecrackers that they're playing with. Who knows? But it's just something to be aware of, especially to provide that anticipatory guidance for the parents. We always want to be educating the parents that these potential things could occur. Obviously, burns are very painful. Depending on how much of the surface area is involved, that's what really kind of guides your care as far as burns are concerned. Fluid replacement and pain management are always going to be your number ones that you're going to be doing. When you have somebody that comes in, let's say they come into the emergency room with a burn, you have to establish that their airway is okay. Because if they're from a house fire, maybe there's lots of chemicals that can be dispersed in the environment, right, from that house fire. So we have to make sure that their airway is intact. Once we know their airway is intact, then we have to replace their fluids, because the skin provides that protection, but it also provides keeping the fluids in. Once that skin is no longer there, the fluids just leak out, basically. So we have to provide fluid replacement. And then once we're providing fluid replacement, we definitely have to think about pain management. Okay? It's going to be very, very, very important for these kiddos. And then depending, again, what is the significance of the burn? How bad is the burn? Is it a partial thickness burn? Is it a full thickness burn? If it's a full thickness burn, they may end up with skin grafting down the road once they've stabilized them and they're on their way to healing. They may require skin grafting, so surgery is going to be involved with that. So all of those things play in to a burn. But most importantly, just remembering that with these two age groups specifically, that would definitely be a danger, for sure. Any questions over anything I covered today, guys? Okay, well, again, I want to thank you guys for taking the time. That's about all the time I have today. For those of you that I have in clinical, I'll see you at 12 o'clock. Otherwise, enjoy the rest of your day, guys. And those of you that I don't have in clinical today, I'll see you on Wednesday. Have a good day, guys. Thanks so much for coming.